I'm your host, Laura Nichols, and this is a note from your coach from me, Queen of the Pivot, to you, badass human. This show is designed as a quick dose of unfiltered motivation to empower you to create the life you want to be living, one of authenticity and alignment. It investigates the power of the pivot and helps create understanding of the human journey, all while sharing tales of pivots from my sometimes ridiculous human experience, as well as my 20 years of experience in working with other humans on growth and change. If you are interested in leveling up your life, stay tuned. A note from your coach starts now. Hello, my loves. This is Laura Nichols. You're listening to Notes from Your Coach on Transformation Talk Radio. Stay with me for the next hour, and I'm going to help you ignite your life with some unfiltered motivation. Each first and third Monday at 12 p.m. Pacific time and 3 p.m. Eastern, I discuss some small but potent nuggets of truth from my book, Notes from Your Coach, to help you create the life that you want to be living. So if this is your first time listening, welcome. For those of you who are back, I'm so glad to have you. The quote from this week that we selected fits so perfectly. And between myself and my co-host for this week, Tom, we chose the quote, "A detour is never wasted." And it just fit perfectly because Tom and I were just meeting yesterday and talking about, I don't know if we labeled it detours, but sort of what you do when things don't go like how you think they're supposed to. And the first thing I want to say about a detour is that it's so normal. I mean, we sort of are trudging through life, walking along, we have a plan, and all of a sudden something kind of comes along and it changes our plan. And then you have to deal with the emotions that come with that, sometimes isolation, overwhelm, and what do you do when you encounter them? So for the first part of this, we're going to just kind of normalize detours. It happens to all of us. And it sounds great to say a detour is never wasted. It sounds lovely. But then when you're in it, it sounds like a terrible quote, right? Because you're knee deep in chaos and it doesn't feel good. You're driving down the road and all of a sudden your GPS says, like, we're recalculating. And often it's like when you're late or lost or you're just like really not in the mood. I think owning a business is just a really big exercise in detouring. Like for instance, I remember when I first started my business and I was so excited and I had a really good consult and I really connected with the client and I was so excited about helping them with what they wanted to change and everything was great and we set it up and we were good to go and then like she ghosted me and I remember feeling so devastated because I had this plan for her and for me and working together. And all of a sudden there was a sort of like end of the road sign that came out of nowhere, like or one of those construction signs. And I had to like turn when I wasn't expecting to. Um, so it comes in a lot of different areas in life. I think being a parent also teaches you to detour. The minute your toddler starts to say no or doesn't do what you want them to do, they have their own ideas. In partnerships, like it's another person who has ideas about things. And so that adds detours to your life. When I was going to get my therapy license, I was on that trajectory and then something happened and that changed. So like detours are a really natural part of life. And I want to really normalize it for people. We all face them in life, in business, and no one gets a free pass. Like I'd like to say life is lifing, right? There's circumstances that we just cannot control. So I want to introduce my co-host today, and he is also no stranger to detours. He's a coach and an entrepreneur, a detour survivor, just like the rest of us. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about him, and then we'll go from there. So Tom is somebody I met through networking, and right away I was just drawn to him because he knows his stuff. He's an ICF associate certified coach, which is a big deal if you're in the life coach community. An executive leadership expert with over 25 years of experience. He works with leaders and teams. He has founded his own business. He helps business owners and corporate leaders find their executive voice, strengthen team dynamics, and drive strategic business transformation. He's also a rock star at mentoring numerous professionals through successful career transitions and promotions and helping organizations. So he works both on the smaller level and the bigger level. He specializes in helping clients create impactful time management habits, really understanding performance metrics and create sustainable accountability standards. So he is speaks a language sometimes that I don't always understand, and he has to explain to me coming from the corporate world. But I just adore him, and I'm so thankful that you're here, Tom. Thank you for jumping on this with me today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And let's be very clear. I think part of why the two of us have such a good time talking to each other is we speak very much the same language most of the time, which is fantastic.
That's true. It's more just like the corporate lingo. Um, but we just met up yesterday and we're
Yeah,
talking about sort of detours in life and not just business, but personal and knowing that that's just a part of it. But I'm wondering if you could share sort of with the audience a moment where life sort of veered off course, the course of that you had planned.
sure. Yeah, I mean, I think my exit from being a corporate employee is a great example of that. Is I had close to 14 years in corporate. I had been working my way up the corporate ladder. In fact, those 14 years, this was post government work, post military experience, and this was my time in the private sector, had all been with the same company. And so I really saw myself staying there for a very long time, continuing to work myself up towards executive levels. And then it's uh, sort of hit a brick wall. I mean, the need for the detour at that point was I had become burnt out. I was stressed. It was impacting my health, both mental, physical. I shouldn't say both mental, physical, and emotional health. So the great trifecta of health, right? And they offered me another position, and it was going to be a similar position with even more stress, more responsibility, more travel, more for these things. And I said no. I said I just can't do it. And the response at that point was, well, you either take this job or you've got to go somewhere else. And I terrified because right, I was a company guy. I was all about the golden handcuffs, the 401k, the benefits and everything else. And I finally said, you know what? I just can't do this. And I had a conversation with my wife and I said, I think I need to do something different. And super supportive. She said, all right, you got to do what you have to do. And so I took the plunge. I mean, I had planned on retiring at this company, quite honestly. And before I knew it, I found myself getting ready to become an entrepreneur, which quite honestly scared the heck out of me. I was completely unready for it from that perspective. I had thought about it once or twice in the past, but it just totally wasn't ready. But here I was, and now I had to do this. And looking back, it was
Yeah.
probably the greatest thing that happened to me professionally. It's my health, my mental, physical, emotional is all way better than it was. My wife says that my relationship with my kids is 1,000 times better. I'm way more present and there with everything that I'm doing. I feel a sense of purpose that I hadn't felt in over a decade, probably closer to 2 decades with everything that I was doing. So it really was an amazing transformation. And the people that I have met along the way, not to say that the people in corporate weren't good also. I have some very close colleagues and friends, but I just met some incredible, inspiring people, through having to be an entrepreneur and going through the journey.
I love this. I feel like you just went over our whole outline for the podcast today. So you sort of like laid the groundwork for everything we're going to talk about because I do want to get to how detours can be beneficial. But I also want to recognize that they're not always lovely and beautiful at the
Oh, no.
beginning, right? And
Mm-mm.
I think it's really interesting because one of my big detours in life also was born from burnout in my career, which it sounds like you said at the beginning was sort of how this all started to come about with you. You had an idea of where you wanted to go, and then that specific position just led you to burnout and your mental health wasn't great. And so I bet there's a lot of people who can relate to that, getting to a place where they just can't do the thing anymore and they
Yeah.
need to take a break or go a different direction or a detour, if you will, since that's what we're talking about.
Mhm.
Do you, looking back now, I'm wondering what stands out most about how you handled the situation. Is there anything that you would change looking back?
Sure. I don't think there's a single person out there who will look back at their life and say, I wish I had done something a little bit different. Um, it's hard to be the money quarterback because, I did start with a franchise. I did start by working with a team. And while one side of me is say, well, my business has changed so much and I separated from the franchise, would I do it differently? No, I shouldn't do it differently because I needed to have that. Um, if I could go back and talk to myself from back when I started, I probably would have gone down the mindset and resilience journey a lot sooner because the ability to cope with these things and having the right, attitude, techniques, and those types of things to deal with the adversity along the way would have made things a lot easier, a lot smoother.
Yeah, and I think that that's such a good point, right? You can't really look back, right? Like really the advice that I'm saying to give is for other people who may be looking at detouring because where we end up is all born from where we were
Yeah,
and the things that we went through and the circumstances and the way we handled situations. So, yeah, I guess when you look back, it's more just what would I do moving forward? You
yeah,
know, in hindsight, I think sometimes detours make so much sense, even if at the time you're kind of going like, what like the heck is happening? You know?
yeah.
Um, so hindsight's 2020, as they say. But like honestly, if I had a dollar for every time life didn't go as planned, I think I would like be recording this from a private island, you know?
Yeah,
I mean, they call me the queen of the pivot for a reason. And a pivot is probably a synonym for a detour, right? Like there's been so many times in my life. And so it for me has become sort of just practice at this point. Like this is just what life is. But
yeah,
when you're at the beginning, you really can feel thrown off or frustrated or confused. And all of those emotions are really human emotions.
absolutely.
And it's okay to feel that way. Do you remember if you could take yourself back? Like what did it feel like to be making that detour?
Terrifying at first. It really was extremely scary. But the odd part is, as terrifying as it was, there was also this sense of peace that came along because now the worst case scenario for me from a corporate standpoint had already happened and I was still alive. We were still there.
Yeah.
So, okay, where do we go from here? And I think, one of the things that I've tried to work with my colleagues and friends and other people I work with is the concept of, we look a lot of times at life as successes and failures, and maybe the right way is successes and learning opportunities. And the learning
Yeah,
opportunities is how we take it.
yeah, absolutely. And again, you're forecasting where we're going with this, but I love that, right? Like being able to take it, deal with the emotions of it, and then reframe it. Well, we're going to take our first break. You're listening to Notes from Your Coach with Laura Nichols. When we come back, we're going to talk about that discomfort that comes with a detour and then how to navigate those unpleasant feelings. So stay tuned and we'll be right back. All right, we are back on Notes from Your Coach with Laura Nichols, also known as Queen of the Pivot. Today, we're talking about all of the detours that come with life and kind of what to do with them. But before we continue, I want to make sure that everyone really knows how to contact you, Tom. If they're listening and they're like, oh my gosh, they feel the way about you that I feel, this guy's amazing. He has so much knowledge and he really can help me in this journey. Like, how do they connect with you?
Thanks, Laura. Probably the easiest way is online. So I have my website, which is secolainsights.com. You can email me at tom@secolainsights.com. So you can notice the theme there. Pretty simple. And then whether it's booking something link on Calendly or something else, I would love to talk to whoever, you know, I love to talk to people, right? Love to learn their stories, see what's going on. And if there's a possibility for us to help or help each other, you know, absolutely open to it.
I love it. And I'll put that in the description as well so people can see it when they're on the various apps. So as we're getting into this segment, we sort of last time normalized with detours that are just everyone goes through them.
Mhm.
But that doesn't mean that they feel good. And
Oh,
it
no.
doesn't mean that they're pleasant to go through. So just because it's a normal thing, you don't wake up and be like, oh, it's a detour or my plans are a mess. Like this big messy disruption is totally great, right? It it can mess with your inner control freak.
Yeah.
Like sometimes you want to throw a full-blown tantrum. Sometimes you want to like pull the covers over your head and be there for the day. So kind of what do we do when like those feelings happen? So an example of this for me was like my plan to build a business, helping people, help them get from A to B. I fell in love with coaching the first time I ever witnessed it. Coming from a mental health background, I thought it was fascinating because it was so action oriented. you don't get stuck talking about, I am this way, I have these feelings. That stuff comes up naturally when you're coaching. But I loved the idea that you're here, you want to go here, and I'm going to help you. And it just matched my skill set. So I was like, yes. So, I'm going along, excited. I have this plan for building this business. And that was all great. But I had to hit the brakes because that was easy. But knowing how to build an actual business
Mhm.
and what that actually takes and what it looks like, man, that's been like the detour of all detours because you're having to connect with people. You have to know how to market, you have to know how to network, right? I thought that I was just going to come along, put my sign out, and that people were just going to come in my door. And that has not been the case necessarily. And so there may or may not have been a lot of dramatic crying over the last 2 years, right? As I've hit various detours along the way. Um, I've spent a lot of time training my brain because that's my expertise to say, what a great opportunity, right? Like this, and look at it from a different way. But that has taken so much time to practice, and it still doesn't always come naturally.
No.
Sometimes you just got to feel the feelings, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes you want to say like, why does the universe hate me? There may be a little dash of self-pity, right? But that's all normal.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if you can relate to that because misery loves
Oh,
company. And so how do you handle this discomfort of realizing that things aren't going to go to plan?
well, I think you first of all have to recognize that when things don't go to plan, there's a negative emotion which is going to pop up, right? There's always going to be a disappointment. There's going to be a frustration. There's going to be a mourning. Sure, we all know that one person out there who is, butterflies and rainbows no matter what happens. And, you know, I, I don't get it. It's not me, but, I have a period of mourning. And it was a colleague of mine said, sometimes you just have to mourn the loss first before you can move forward. And it's just recognizing that, you know what, I had my heart set on this and it didn't happen. Okay, I'm frustrated, but I think a lot of it ultimately comes down to making a choice, right? And I remember when I was going on this journey, had made that big pivot. The one thing that I had worked on was I'd always heard that being happy was a choice, being positive was a choice, and I said to myself, I am going to wake up every morning with a conscious choice to be positive, to look at this in whatever positive way I can, whether I believed it or not. I was gonna move forward with that attitude, and it's like any other muscle. It takes time to develop. If you're not used to doing something, you've got to practice it. And it was forcing myself to practice positivity from the outset to say, you know what? Okay, this is going to be all right. We're going to handle this. And so it comes much more naturally now. It's not necessarily knee jerk all the time. It depends on the size of the pivot that you have to make sometimes. But I do think it comes down to a choice of I want to be positive. I'm going to be positive. I'm going to practice being positive. And before you know it, you find yourself being positive way more often.
Ah, you're speaking my language. That's like how I work, right? Yeah, I think it's so important to remember that just like going to the gym
Yeah.
or anything else that you're learning to do, shifting your mindset or practicing positivity is practice, just like everything else. It doesn't come naturally to everybody. And
Mhm.
I would go back to say those people who are rainbows and sunshine, either one, are not being totally honest with themselves, right? Or two, have worked really hard to cultivate that
Yeah.
mindset.
Yeah.
They may have been somebody who's gone through a lot of twists and turns and have realized what is important and been able to really practice that. So I love that feeling. And I think what you said about the fact that it depends on what the detour is,
Mhm.
right? Like you might sometimes we don't talk enough about mourning or grief. When something comes along and changes your trajectory, there's a sense of loss. And being aware of it and knowing that that's just part of the process of the detour, um, normalizing that I think is so super important and allowing yourself to feel it,
Yeah.
right? And know that this is just uncomfortable and normal. It doesn't mean it's bad, right?
Yeah.
Like it's not good or bad. It's just data. And I
Yeah.
think understanding that it's data is important, or feedback is another way. Like something's not working, it allows you to say, this is what needs to change. This is maybe what I can do here that I wasn't doing before. I'm wondering, how do you deal with how do you deal with a detour as far as feedback goes and treating it as feedback or data?
So I'd worked through a program which had helped a lot. It's a program you might see it on LinkedIn or other places called Positive Intelligence. I'm a huge advocate of it. I take a lot of my clients through it as well. There's a story in there, and do we have time for me to tell a quick story?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Go for it.
It's an old, I believe it's Chinese folktale.
Oh my gosh. Okay, side note, this is one of my favorites. Go
Is
for
this
it.
the stallion story?
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah. Okay. So, and I might tell it differently, so we might have to compare notes later on. But
Actually, hang on a second. I think you're the one who told this to me like 2 years ago. And I think I've been repeating it back ever since because I love it so much. So it's perfect that you're
okay.
telling it here.
All right, glad I have approval to tell this one. So the story goes like this. There's an old farmer who owns a stallion that he's very proud of, and he enters him into a race at a local festival. And the horse is just amazing. He's so fast, he blows the doors off of all the other racers out there. And everybody comes up to the farmer afterwards and says, "You are so lucky, you're so fortunate, you have this magnificent stallion. Congratulations." And the old man very stoically says, "Who's to say what is good and what is bad?" Everybody's looking at him like, what's wrong with this guy? He just won the race. Well, some time goes by, and the story about this fantastic horse spreads, and these bandits, hearing the story, raid the farm, and they wind up stealing the horse. And now, of course, all of his neighbors come to the farmer and they say, "Oh, we're so sorry. This is terrible. You've lost this wonderful stallion." And the old man just says, "Who's to say what is good and what is bad?" And again, the neighbors are looking at him like, "What is wrong with him? He just lost." Well, as the local militia is kind of making their tours and their rounds, they encounter the bandits and they wind up getting into this battle and arresting the bandits, and the horse escapes. And he goes out into the mountains and happens to become part of this herd of wild horses, and eventually makes his way back to the farm with all these horses. And of course, all the neighbors are saying, "Oh, look at your great fortune. You have all these wonderful horses. Your horse is back." And he says, who's to say what is good and what is bad? And at this point, the neighbors are starting to get a little numb to this saying. And
Oh yeah, they
well,
think he's cuckoo.
yeah, a little cuckoo. You're right. Well, now that he has all these horses, his son says to him, "Well, now we have to get all these horses ready to sell. So I'm going to start breaking in these horses." And as he's trying to break in one of the other stallions, he winds up being thrown and breaks his hip very badly to the point where he can't walk without assistance. And of course, now all the neighbors are commiserating, "Your poor son, your poor son." Well, of course, who's to say what is good and what is bad? Well, it turns out that the empire is at war with a neighboring country. And so a representative of the emperor comes through and conscripts all the men of age, 12 through 50, except for his son, who now cannot walk because he's no longer able-bodied. And as they all go off to war, they find out months later that this particular company got into a battle with the enemy and were killed to a man. And so the story continues on and on and on, but the idea is that things happen. There's no disputing that we experience things in life, and whether they're good or whether they're bad quite often depends on how we look at it and how we decide to move forward with it. And a lot of times we all come to the assumption that, well, this is such a great thing, or this is such a horrible thing. Who's to say what is good and what is bad?
Ah, yes, I love that story so much. And side note, he's that person that you're like, seriously, this is gonna be your response every time. He's like the old version of our modern positive, Polly. But I think
Pollyanna,
like
yeah.
yeah, like I think it's just such a good reminder because I think all of us can look back at something and understand that, oh wow, like at the time, this was a really terrible thing in my mind, right?
Yeah,
Based on my perspective at the time. But then it led to all of these other things that it wouldn't have led to before. And if you look at detours as sort of like a plot twist in your own
mhm,
little Netflix narrative, like and look at it from a sense of, ooh, like where's this going now? And curiosity. Sometimes that can be really helpful. And I think the more detours you go through, the easier that gets, knowing that I've done stuff before, like
yeah,
you said, I've been let go from like the job that I really wanted before, and I've survived it. And so I know that I'm going to be able to handle whatever's coming. And guess what? I also don't know what's coming.
Yeah.
So understanding that we are not fortune tellers, and so we get to kind of decide how we're going to react to the situation. So I love that. When we come back, we're going to talk more about detours and that they're inevitable and like what we do with that. So I'm Laura Nichols, and you're listening to Notes from Your Coach. And stay tuned. We'll be right back. All right, we are back on Notes from Your Coach with Laura Nichols, and we are talking about how to find compassion for yourselves, like when you hit that detour or many that everyone hits. And a detour is never wasted is the quote that we're talking about today. It's from a book that I wrote that I put out for myself as a birthday gift a year ago with 150 different quotes in it that really applied a lot to my clients and my own journey. And since then, I have rewritten it. And the little secret is that that's going to be coming out at the beginning of the year in January of 2025. And the way it is I've taken 90 of those 150 quotes and I've added sort of commentary. So it's the quote, it's sort of an idea about what to do with the quote, how it applies to life, and then reflection questions to go with it. So I'm really excited about that. So we're going to look forward to that coming out on Amazon in a couple months. And then also, I wanted to say before I move on that as an end of the year gift to my people, I put together a package. And instead of because I really wanted to take some time to wrap up this year well. And so instead of working with people for 12 sessions for 3 months, what I'm going to do is 9 sessions. Oh, I'm sorry, 6 sessions, real quick, get them in and out to wrap up 2024 really well. And so if that's something you're interested in, it's at a pretty big discount. I only have room for 10 in that one. So find me in the show notes and reach out and we'll go from there. So in this next section, I really want to talk about like what do we do when detours happen, right? You've hit a detour, you're kind of standing there in the metaphorical middle of nowhere. You're looking at do people, I mean, when we use maps, like crumpled up road maps, I still love a good map. So what do we do? Do we wallow? Do we throw a tantrum? Or do we figure out like how we're going to move forward? And honestly, maybe it's all of the above a little bit, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, my first instinct used to be really to like panic. Like I would get really overwhelmed. Oh my gosh, how do I fix this? What action do I need to take? Which is kind of ironic because I'm a big feeler, but my immediate response is to like, well, for it used to be get overwhelmed, but now it's like, let me take action, which is super interesting because I don't always feel the emotion or the feeling until later. And so then that sort of comes afterwards. But I think that there's definitely some steps to moving forward when you're faced with a detour. I think the first thing is just a pause,
Mm.
right? Like anytime something comes, pause, resist the urge to panic, resist the urge to call 5 people and look for advice. Just sit with what's happening, right? What's going on here? What do I need to know about the situation? Like, what exactly is happening, right? I think the next thing to really think about is reframing the narrative of it. So looking at it from a different angle, like knowing, okay, I've done this in the past. I have everything I need to do this. Now, what is this situation trying to teach me here? Or what is, instead of we love a what question in coaching instead of a why. I know we talked about that yesterday. So instead of why is this happening to me, it's what is this trying to teach me? You know, for instance, if you have like a package that you're launching and it
Mhm.
just doesn't sell, right? Instead of saying like, why is this happening? You can say, okay, what am I learning from this? What needs to change to like what marketing needs to change here? Um, and then the next would be like taking a small step. So you don't have to fix everything at once,
Mm.
right? You take one small step to start to move in the new direction. And then sometimes it's calling in reinforcements, right?
Yeah.
The experts, the people who can support you,
Yeah.
getting an outside perspective. Hey, this thing happened. What do you think about it? What are your thoughts on it? Um, And I think that those are some really basic steps for dealing with a detour when they come. So those are like my ideas for detour coping methods. I'm curious to know like what you think when a curveball comes.
I think you laid it out beautifully. I don't think there's too much more that can be added to that. I especially the part that you added at the end there is reaching out. I think one of the worst things we can do is make the assumption that we have to handle everything by ourselves. And I think there's a certain amount of, let me take a step back here. I think one of the greatest gifts in life is humility. And what I mean by that is not to be humbled by other people or to be humiliated, because it's absolutely different, but being humble enough to recognize that I don't need to handle this by myself. And I think it's a gift to reach out to other people to ask them for help. It's a massive gift you're giving to somebody else to ask them for help and give them the opportunity to help. Um, and so I think that's. And let me put a pitch for wonderful Laura here. And please, if she's offering packages for people at the end of the year, and you don't have if you're trying to deal with something on your own, reach out to her because she is
Mhm.
phenomenal. And the reason I'm such a big advocate of this is a massive part of getting through the detours in life is having that support system. Having the support system ahead of time, knowing the people in your life who not only support you, but are the positive supporters in your life. We don't necessarily need to have the commiserators. Every one of us has more commiserators than we know what to do with. But at some point, we need the people around us who are going to help us reframe, who are going to pull us out, we're going to shine the lights on the other portions of it, and who we can turn to and say, I am having a really hard time reframing this. I need another perspective. Please help.
That, listen, I think you're so right. Of like all of the steps in dealing with a detour, I think that that one is so good to highlight, and for multiple reasons. Because I think it's really easy to isolate yourself when you
Mm-hmm.
come across something hard, especially to deal with the emotions of it at the beginning, and also because we live in a world where vulnerability is not a given, right?
No.
A lot of people don't have the humility to say, "Hey, I'm human. Anyone else human? Do you want to join me? I'm human. Are you human?"
Yeah.
Right? And when we are able to say, "Hey, like I'm not okay," or this thing happened and I need someone to bounce this off of, it is a massively beautiful gift to give somebody,
Mm-hmm.
to say, "Please help me." And I think that that's really a beautiful reframe. So you're giving somebody the opportunity to use their skills, and their values to affect you in a positive way. This just happened to me. Actually, it's so funny how the universe does these things when like you need it. So this, in the last couple of weeks, I've hit my own major detour and sort of like, where do I go from here? What does this look like? And I, just like a lot of people, sometimes struggle to reach out and when like things are hard. And I actually did. And my friend, she knows me well enough to know that it was a really big deal that I texted her and I said, "Hey, I need a friend." And it was business related. And she's a fellow business owner. And she was like, "Where are you? When are we meeting? What do I need to do?" And it ended up being such a massive gift to me
Mm-hmm.
to have her sit and hold space for my feelings about the detour. And then she's a gifted business person. And so like then where to go. And then after that, like I'm telling you, the universe was like, here you go. Then, you and I set up time to talk. And so it was just really a week of the universe saying, "Hey, I've got your back. Like this might be a detour, but you're also going to be supported through this." And that wouldn't have happened if I hadn't have said, "Hey, like I'm really struggling here and I could use some assistance." Um, I'm curious to know, how do you find your people? Like, how do you know who is going to be that person for you when you hit a roadblock or a detour that's going to be that person to go to?
Yeah, I love that you're asking the question because I was going to ask the same thing back to you in some cases. Well, because I think the important part of what you said was that at some point you went out and you built relationships. You took the time you know, to go meet people, to network, to do whatever else. And it's only through doing that type of action, do you get to know people and figure out what you can rely on them for, who they're going to be in your life. You and I have both been to networking events together, to same places, and we meet we meet people, and as you get to build the relationship with them, you say, you know what, I will come to this person for this, but not for that. Or I realize that this person shares a similar approach, philosophy, whatever else. I'm going to have another coffee with this person. I'm going to call Laura up and I'm going to say, we haven't talked in forever because you're part of my people. I want to hear what's going on because I know that if I need the backup, if I need the reframe, if I need the help, that Laura is on my speed dial list for that type of help. But that comes from cultivating the relationships. You don't just meet somebody and say, "Hey, I need to call and dump on you tomorrow because I'm having a tough day." It's no, we've gotten to know each other, and I know that I can call on you when times are tough, not because you're going to commiserate, but you're going to be there to help me reframe. You're going to help me call me out on my own, perceptions or insecurities or whatever else that might be coming up, and I know that you can help me. So I think a large part of that is going out, meeting people, interacting. For some of us, I mean, I personally am an introvert by nature. Going out and networking is not something that has always come to me naturally, excuse me. Um, but there's this expression in entrepreneurship of you have to become comfortable being uncomfortable, and so you have to realize what's good for you and what you need to do. And some of that is if you find your whole world is wrapped around sitting in front of your laptop, and you don't have those connections, you got to go find them. And there are definitely places to do them, but it takes effort.
Yeah, I mean, there are groups everywhere, right? Like
Yeah.
you can look in so many places. And I think your point of starting to understand who can be there for certain things is really valid and important, right?
Yeah.
And I learned that really early on in various aspects of my life, and they all kind of you got me thinking. And a lot of them are based on detours, right? When I moved from school counseling to coaching, I had to find entrepreneurs. I had to find people who got the struggle and were doing it well and had the same values of as me. When I was coming out of the closet at 38, I had to find other women who had done the same and could really understand what I was going through and hold my hand through there. And so I think in various detours, you're going to reach out to various different people at times, but being able to be vulnerable and say, I need help, is just a massive skill. And just like being positive, being vulnerable is also a skill that sometimes takes developing. And side note, I don't think I knew you were an introvert. But it doesn't surprise me because my world is full, like I'm not, I'm obviously a massive extrovert, but my world is really filled with introverts. I just like collect them like magnets. So I love my sweet introverts. They're like definitely my favorites. So we're going to wrap up this section. I'm Laura Nichols, the Queen of the Pivot. You're listening to Notes from your coach on Transformation Talk Radio. We're going to take a quick break. And then when we return, we're going to talk about what are the actual benefits of a detour. We've talked a little bit about this along the way, but we're really going to dive in and check this out. So we'll be right back. All right, we are back on Notes from Your Coach, and we are looking at the reframe. How is a detour actually beneficial? And as a coach, I love a good reframe. I spend a lot of time like changing people's perspectives. Like, what if we looked at it this way? What if we looked at it that way? And it's something I'm like gifted in. So I really want to take the time to talk about how a detour actually can end up being a win in the end, and it's not always easy. Like it's like getting stuck in traffic and being like, what a great opportunity for growth, right? Probably not, at least, right? Like,
Yeah.
one time I was trying to move from one school to another in a school counseling position. And I was convinced, like it was from the school I was at to my son's school. And in my mind, it was the answer to like everything I needed. I was now a single mom and like how transportation was an issue. And I knew the administrative team at the school and the interview went amazing. And I was like, yeah, like I got this on lock, like no problem. This is totally my job. And then they went with somebody else. First of all, my pride was a little like hurt because I was like, what? Like, how could you not want me? But it's so interesting now because not getting that job was kind of the start of me leaving school counseling and then ultimately becoming coach and starting this business. And so now I know like that in the end, it really led to some really amazing things.
Yeah.
Now, at the time, was I like hurt? Yeah. Like, did I mourn the loss of what I thought the job that I thought I was going to have? Absolutely. But there's some major wins. My life is a completely different direction now. What are we like, 3 years later from that? And so I'm really grateful and have a lot of gratitude for how it happened. But at the time that the detour occurred, it was not, I did not feel that way. So I wonder, have you ever looked back at a detour and thought, wow, that's actually exactly what I needed at the time, even in the moment you didn't love it, but back looking back, you're like 100%.
Oh yeah, I think my life is full of them. Also, I mean, I mentioned, my shift from the corporate was probably one of the greatest things that had happened to me. I will tell you, looking all the way back to when I was in, fifth grade, right? My family moved. I hated it. I was so mad at my family for moving. Um, but I realized that if we hadn't done that, I would not have met my wife. Because my wife and I grew up in the same hometown. Met technically met in middle school, but we went to high school together. We dated in high school on and off and things, whatever else. But I have five wonderful kids, and I have a family that I wouldn't trade for the world. But that would not have happened without that. As much as it sucks to move in middle school, it's just what
That's a rough time. That's a rough time to pick up and move for sure.
Yeah, but a different aspect from the whole switching of the corporate thing. When I moved from corporate, it required me to learn a lot about mindset, mental resiliency and change, those types of things. Some of the stuff that I've made a study of, since becoming a coach. And as you know, 6 months ago, my family had a massive, medical concern. Someone very dear to me, was in the ICU and almost died. If it had not been for the training and the practice that I had in the mental resiliency, I don't know what that would have done to my family.
I just got
So
goosebumps.
yeah, so I mean, again, you know, would I be much happier if my it was my spouse who had gotten sick? If she hadn't gotten sick, absolutely. But the fact that I had these tools available to me never would have happened if I had stayed in corporate. I probably would have ended up, in the ER with a heart attack or, mental breakdown or whatever else it was. Don't get me wrong. Uh, it's still very stressful and it's something that I continue to work through because it was a huge trauma, but that's a pivot. If that pivot had not happened in my life when it did to get me out of corporate and get me down this path, I don't know where we would be today.
Yeah, what a beautiful example of how a detour benefited you now in life when another detour hit, right?
Yeah.
I think you mentioned resiliency a couple of times, and in the coaching world, at least life coaching world, that is thrown around a lot. Or
Mm.
if you're going through a divorce and you have kids, it's kids are resilient, kids are resilient. And so I get really used to hearing the word. However, I think it's really important to lean into the fact that detours, pivots do make you learn resiliency.
Yeah. Yeah.
What does it mean to dig in? What does it mean for your roots to go deep enough into the soil that you are solid when that wind comes and when that storm comes?
Yeah.
And without those things, without the things that come along that sort of knock us off our feet, we don't really build those resiliency muscles. And so it's like, gosh, leg day at the gym, everyone like some people love it, but like leg day can be like, some people dread it.
Mm.
But when you do it, you can do the squats, right?
Yeah.
So when things come along, and I think oftentimes the bigger detours that come lead to the more resiliency skill building that we end up with.
Yeah.
Um, but what a beautiful way to look back and realize that if that detour hadn't happened, you would not necessarily have had the skills to deal with the massive detour that you and your family experienced, in this last year.
Yeah.
And I think that that's such a beauty. Thank you for sharing that with everybody. I appreciate your vulnerability there. Um, I also think that sometimes detours lead you to be creative,
Yeah.
right?
Oh yeah.
Like when you have a plan and it all makes sense, and then all of a sudden it doesn't go. You kind of have to be like, all right, plan A didn't work, right? So I'm being forced off of the beaten path, right?
Hmm.
So what new route am I gonna discover? It's kind of like you're driving, you're on a road trip and you're forced onto a different road. And so you get to discover a little coffee shop that you wouldn't have gotten to see otherwise, right?
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, does that ring a bell for you? Do you have any ideas of like how creativity has developed due to detours in your life?
Oh, absolutely. Because you wind up having to get, as you said, get creative. I mean, you said something in one of the previous segments what I thought was really important is like one of the first steps when you hit these detours is taking that pause. It
Mm.
is because I think we get very, very accustomed to the fight or flight mechanism when something goes wrong, right? You get agitated, you get, frustrated, you get tensed and clenched up and all the rest of that stuff. But it's not until you stop and take a breath and reassess that you start saying to yourself, you start using your creative side of your brain, right? Is what can I do? What are my options? How can I move forward? Because again, going back to the stallion story, right? What happened happened. There is you can't deny it. You can kick and scream all you want, it doesn't change anything. But you have to figure out how to move forward or how to take this next, or maybe if moving forward isn't an option, how to backtrack so you can go to the other place. But you have to be able to make an assessment, and after you've done that a number of times, you're gaining experience, right? The person who lives their entire life sheltered and never has to make a decision for themselves and all of a sudden gets, thrown into life, a lot of times they fail, they sink, they can't handle it. But if you're dealing with adversity throughout your entire life, you know, the smaller details are nothing. You don't even see them anymore. So it's like you said, it's you get better at all these things, you get the experience. And I also find it very, very interesting that when you talk to people, when you listen to somebody, a motivational speaker, right? You never hear a motivational speaker talk about how they were born with a silver spoon in their mouth and they had everything handed to them, right? It's always about what have they overcome? You are motivated and you are encouraged and inspired by those who overcame a massive something and how they did it and how can you learn from it?
Yeah, that hero story, right?
Yeah,
Like the hero story is so important. And what a great point, because the other thing that detours do is they add depth and layer to your life and your stories.
yeah,
And without that, as you said, every motivational speaker, right? Every person that you talk to that you can relate to, the reason that you can connect is because detours are so human. And so when we can say, hey, this thing happened, and side note, it kind of sucked. And then this is how I got over it. Someone else is like, oh man, well, me too. Or
yeah,
wow, if you were able to do X, Y, and Z, well, maybe I can too. And I think being able to be vulnerable and share our various detours and how it was hard,
yeah,
how we handled it, and then what we did from there, just is a way to connect with others, which I mean, I think is one of the best things about life is being able to connect with people and build relationships.
yeah,
And I think it's really an unexpected gift of a detour to be able to um share that with somebody else,
yeah.
you know.
You never have any idea who you're inspiring whenever you're telling your story to somebody. So I think it's worth sharing.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we wrap up, I'm curious, like, if you wanted the listeners to take away one thing from this episode, what would it be?
Uh, Pause, right? When the detour comes, pause, and then decide how do you want to move forward. I think that's probably the one thing with all of
I love that. I mean, I feel like I couldn't have said it better myself.
that.
So for my listeners, as you're thinking and then listening to this, I want you to think about a detour that you've experienced in your life. And I want you to think about what is one unexpected gift or lesson that detour gave you, right? Write it down, put it somewhere where you're going to see it, right? Remind yourself that you have already overcome things. You've already started to build skills so that the next time when a detour comes, you know that you have all the skills you need to get through it. Right? I think it's really important to realize that every time we hit a detour, it's just going to be reliant on the skills you've already built before, right? Like the what you shared, Tom, about learning resiliency and mindset from one detour then led to you to be able to use those skills in a second one. So thank you so much, Tom, for being here today. I
My
really
pleasure. Thank you,
appreciate
Laura.
you. I adore you, and I'm so glad that you came on today. For my listeners, as you step back into your human journey, I just want you to remember this week's unfiltered motivation from this episode that a detour is never wasted. Listen, you've got this. And in case you need a reminder, you're a total badass. Keep rocking it. Until next time, stay true, stay empowered, stay resilient, and remember the power of the pivot. If you want to contact me, you can go to my website, Notes from Your Coach. All the information's on the contact page. You can also sign up for the monthly newsletter there. Follow the show. Give feedback. I'd love to hear what you guys are thinking about it. Thank you for tuning in to Notes from Your Coach. I had a wonderful time today with Tom. Uh, Join me every first and third Monday at 3 Eastern, 12 Pacific, and have a great week. I'll see you back here next time. Always remember that you are your greatest asset. For more Notes from Your Coach with me, Queen of the Pivot, tune in every first and third Monday at 12 p.m. Pacific on Transformation Talk Radio. Each episode is chock full of unfiltered motivation to ignite your life and focuses on a tiny nugget of potent truth to empower you to take action and understand the power of the pivot. Share this show and share your journey using hashtag Notes from Your Coach. Subscribe and leave a review by visiting notesfromyourcoach.com.